It is my sincere pleasure to introduce writer-director Cory Finley and our stars, Olivia Cooke and Anya Taylor-Joy. Come on down, ladies. Isn't that dress beautiful? I want that dress. It's a really nice dress.
Thanks.
Hello.
So how are you guys doing tonight?
Doing great. Thank you all for sticking around.
Yeah, we appreciate this lovely audience. I'm very excited for this conversation. I really enjoyed the film because it does hit a certain sweet spot of mine, which is women doing crazy things and violence. That's pretty much my beat as a writer and critic. So one of the first things I really wanted to talk about was with you, Cory, because this began as a play, and I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about why you decided to make this into a film and the translation process and what changed maybe.
I think part of it was very just sort of gut level. I usually, when I'm writing a play, will sort of envision the proscenium stage. Mm-hmm. And with this one, I just started seeing the story in close-ups and in wide shots, and I started kind of seeing these moments of movement and tracking shots, and it just felt like it kind of wanted to exist as a film. And then I think more practically, there was a whole kind of like wing of the story, sort of Anton's whole section, the Tim character, that was just very hard to explore on stage and with theater storytelling. And I felt like we wanted to break out of the house. The whole play would have really just been that couch and the two characters sitting on the couch. And I wanted to move around and see some of the world and the community. And I thought a film was the way to do that.
Oh, definitely. There's also such beauty to this film and how it's shot that it's hard for me to even imagine it as a play at this point, even though the dialogue is so rich and barbed. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Olivia's character teaches Anya's character this very interesting technique of crying. I don't know if that's a real thing, but I'm gonna try it and let you guys know later. But I was curious if you guys could talk a little bit about preparing for that scene and shooting it, because it's such a rich moment in the film.
Well, that's all Liv being awesome. So how did you prepare, Liv?
I didn't prepare. The technique doesn't exist. I tried it. It doesn't work. The reason why, well, you've got a story where the technique came from, don't you, Cory?
Well, the way that her character describes the technique is kind of modeled on what some like cocky 15-year-old actors told me back at acting camp back in the day. That was how you really cry. It was fun filming that scene because the take that we ended up using, which is like just an over-the-shoulder single of Olivia crying, was the second setup. The first setup was we had this really elaborate shot that was like the camera tracking laterally from Anya over to Olivia so that it landed on her as she was crying. And none of us knew exactly how that beat was going to go on the day, and if she was going to be able to cry in the 10 seconds that she has allotted in the scene. And so we were all like staring at the monitor, and the camera slowly moves toward her, and she has like these amazing waterworks, and we were like, yeah! We had to sort of muffle our cheer backstage, but that was a fun day.
It's a weird thing to put on your CV.
Yeah. It seems useful to know how to cry on cue, though. I mean, I would use it.
Well, it's not just
so manipulative.
It's not crying on cue. I mean, you just have to think about sad things and be a bit depressing for like an hour and a half while they shoot the scene.
Oh. Yeah, that's a little intense. I don't think I could. That's why I'm not an actor. I just critique actors, because I couldn't pull that off. So I was wondering if all of you could talk about what personally was your favorite scene to shoot in the film, because there's a lot of really great moments. And I was just curious which one really stood out for you as either actors or director.
I think Cory gave me such an incredible opportunity, and it feels so nice to be able to talk about it, because most of the time I'm like, spoilers, I can't say anything. But the scene. That was amazing because we did it in real time. And so I remember Cory mentioning it to me, and he was like, so what's going to happen is we're going to stay on Olivia, and you're going to go upstairs, change your shirt into a bloody one. Am I giving everything? Is it better being mysterious?
I think we're in it already.
let's
We're in
just
it.
go
Okay,
for
cool. Secrets, people. No, so like I was going to change my shirt, dip my gloves into this bloody goop thing, grab the knife, run all the way down the house, all the way back down, all the way over to the other side, and then just Cory wanted me to start off not crying, go all the way up to like having an absolute fit, and then take it down again. And we did it 4, 5 times.
4 times because we had 4 surfaces of cushion to cover with blood. Yes.
And that was just genuinely one of the most exhilarating moments of my life. And when we finished that day, very, very early in the morning, it was just one of those things of like, that was a cool, if very macabre life moment that I get to enjoy. So that was my favorite scene.
Nice. That's definitely a great scene. What about you, Olivia? Do you have a favorite?
I really enjoyed filming the scene where Tim, Anton's character, is in the bathtub, and us two are teaming up on him, because that was the first time that we banded together, really, and you see us both in the same shot on screen, and we just like these powerhouses, and it was so fun. I didn't realise how funny it would come off when I watched it. I had a completely different idea of, I thought it was going to come across as quite a tragic, and it is still. I mean, Anton's performance is incredible, but I didn't realise how just fucking horrible people we are. When we were doing it, we were having quite fun, but it's just, oh my God. It was juicy. That was my favourite scene to film. That's good.
No, that's a great scene. And I was wondering, obviously the film has such rich dialogue that seems to require just a lot of presence and just really being on point. But I was wondering, was there really any improvisation on set, or did you guys have any input into the script, or did you kind of just stay with what you ended up writing?
We had a period of a couple days of rehearsal beforehand where we all sort of sat around with the scripts around a table and kind of talked through the characters, like the given circumstances of the characters' lives, and how they'd known one another prior to the beginning of the movie, and there's sort of a whole buried history that the movie doesn't go into in detail, but we wanted to kind of flesh it out together. And that felt really collaborative and cool. And I think we did make some script changes both in the room and then little things afterward as well. And even just our talks, our sort of initial meetings over lunch or coffee or whatever it was, those were really informative to me as far as sort of fine-tuning the characters and the way they spoke and their arcs.
But it was so minor, because Cory's writing, it was just so incredible that I feel like you're giving us too much credit. I feel like it was just I feel like we changed barely anything. Maybe like an exterior to an interior.
Or like hey from higher or something like that.
I will say it was a real joy in the edit being able to sort of figuring out how many lines of my precious dialogue I could slash because these two are so good with silence and stillness and their pauses and their looks and their really precise work with where their eyes are focusing and the way they move. All of that was so much more interesting than so many of the overwritten lines that I got to cut. And some good ones too, let's be honest.
Yeah,
but,
give yourself some credit. Don't be hard on yourself. Let me do that. I'm the critic. I can do that. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Olivia, is your character is so blunt and emotionless, which is a change from, I know you from Bates Motel, and so that's such a change from things I've seen you in before. And I was wondering, how did you prepare for this character, and what really drew you to the role?
Well, I think that's just it. I think I've played really hyper-emotional characters in the past, and so when reading this script, I was instantly drawn to Amanda and just the challenge of how to play her and it not come across as dull. Or just deadpan the whole way through. I wanted to find the peaks and the valleys within a performance, and how to turn up the manipulation and the trickery in different little moments. And And I started off researching like different mental health ailments that she may have been afflicted with, but then I didn't want to get stuck to one. I wanted to just pick from like different ones, and because I mean we're all so multifaceted, and she says herself that she says herself that that she's been diagnosed with different illnesses from the DSM-5, and they've still come out without a conclusive diagnosis. So I thought it'd be more fun just to have her as someone who just can't, I mean, for whatever reason, just can't access emotions that are very, very buried deep down within her. For maybe that's just the way she was born, or maybe something happened in her childhood to inform that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anya, can you talk a little bit about your process maybe with the character? I know you've definitely done a lot of work within like sort of horror and noirish and definitely suspenseful films, but did you approach this character a little differently than how you've done in the past with characters in similar heavy genre works?
I think we approach each character differently because they're all different people, and for me at least, with Lily, it all started with her posture, which was exhausting to do every day because she's so straight and, you know, like put together. But it was, I was really drawn to trying to build a character from the outside in rather than the inside out, because this facade that she's spent so much time carefully putting together to be porcelain and perfect, and the sort of Instagram version of perfection that no human being can ever possibly live up to. I was really intrigued to see, okay, so this is the veneer in front, and as we morally strip away all these insulation levels, where are we going to get to? And that was that really drew me in. But as you can see, she's not the nicest person, so it was difficult to be her for a month.
Yeah, but I think that's what makes her so fascinating, especially as you go along with the film. You start to realize, oh man, she is fucked up. I love it. I mean, I loved it. I love it.
Yeah, she's a piece of work.
Yeah. I mean, I love female characters like that, and I think one thing I noticed, and I've seen in also a lot of reviews, is mentioning different like noirs and certain satires that it seems the film may have been inspired by. But I was wondering, as actors, did you guys have maybe performances from similar works in mind, or did you really try to just focus on the journey of your characters rather than being too mired and picking up inspiration elsewhere?
I think that's it. I think Cory gave us a couple of films to watch, just to kind of get a vibe for the noir kind of. Just kind of the vibe of the movie that he was going for. But I think if I watched a great performance and I just tried to copy it, and sorry if I mean it's best for me to stay away from that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What films did you get them to watch, Cory?
I don't
Strangers on a
remember.
Train, Mulholland Drive.
Strangers on a Train.
Nice.
Probably Mulholland Drive, just because I love that movie.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of a tonal reference it was, but yeah, this is the two women and crossing paths, and there are similarities there.
No, I like that, definitely. I can definitely see that. I've seen people say Heathers, but I more see the noir sort of vibe, definitely, and sort of the dynamic between the characters, and especially how the dialogue is.
And actually, I've never really thought about this before, but in terms of performances that inform what we just did, I think watching, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you, but watching you was very informative, because the two characters do start off in very different places, and then kind of, because they so desperately want something that the other one has that is completely unattainable to them, they sort of meet in the middle and start to mirror each other and then branch off again. And so every time we did a scene, we just found ourselves becoming quite symbiotic, where, we'd just do this at the same time or move at the same time. And it was a weird mirror image effect that we had going on whilst we were acting.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. And obviously, the character you play, Lily, we also get a lot of her like family dynamic, because that definitely informs the film. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about working with Paul Sparks and Francie Swift to kind of create that dynamic, because it's such a tense one. Like every moment is like, so who's gonna get cut? No one gets cut as soon as I expected, to be honest. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about creating that family dynamic with those two actors, and maybe even a little bit about the rehearsal process with them specifically.
We didn't get any rehearsal time with them, but I will say, and I think a lot of people are quite surprised, this is a very sophisticated movie audience, so maybe you guys aren't, but they're just the loveliest people. They're so wonderful and so supportive and sweet, and it's always strange when you meet someone and you're like, "Hi, I'm your daughter, nice to meet you." But we all just really got along, and they're such talented actors, and the dynamic that Francie and Paul had themselves made it quite easy to, not as people, but on screen, made it quite easy to react in that sort of like, ugh, way, because Francie herself is a very outgoing, kind, sweet, lovable person, and so just to see her being so tamped down and, you know, recurringly cut, you know, verbally by Paul, it allowed that resentment to build from a character point of view. But we actually just had so much fun and made fun of Paul drinking this green sludge consistently on set. We had a good time.
Yeah, so what was the vibe on set? I'm kind of curious because it's such an exacting tone. It's obviously a very brutal film, even if a lot of the violence actually happens off screen. So I was wondering, how was the vibe on set?
Well, I have very, very few other sets to compare it to,
yeah,
but I
that's
think
true.
we certainly tried to keep it very focused, but to have as much fun as we could. I remember, I think, a high school theater director telling me that when you're doing a really light comedy, people should be screaming at each other and really focused and really angry, and that's what births good comedy. And when you're doing much darker material, you should be kinder and having fun. And hopefully you're kind and having fun in any genre, but we certainly tried to keep it lighter than the mood of the movie.
I would hope so.
It was brilliant. It was 4 weeks. It was really quick. It just felt very inspired. I mean, nothing went wrong. Nothing went wrong, and that's just, no one wants to say it. You're like 3 weeks in, and you're like, oh my God, we're doing really well. We're doing really well. Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it. And it was brilliant.
Nice. This was obviously one of Anton Yelchin's last films, and I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about working with him, and if any specific moment on set really stands out with working with him.
Something that I've been saying that I hope it comes across all right is that it's very difficult to talk about him as a person because he is our friend and we really miss him. However, as you've just seen, him as a performer is just completely unparalleled, and he brings such energy and zest and intelligence to each one of his performances. But what's also really striking about him playing Tim is that Tim was a character that could, in the hands of a lesser actor, been quite a minor one, and instead Anton made him sort of the moral compass of our film, which is, you've just seen him, quite a feat. And he has so much heart in all of his performances, and you're really rooting for him. And he was so enthusiastic about the script and so excited about the way that it was being shot by our lovely DP, Lyle Vincent. And I mean, it's been a real pleasure to tour this movie around because people unanimously love him. And it's lovely to be able to share that with other people and know that they miss him too.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah. I think we all just feel super lucky to have had the opportunity to work with him too. He was such an incredibly prolific guy and worked with such an amazing kind of long line of filmmakers and other actors. And, I think if you talk to any of them, you'll see the way he left a mark on all of them and was not just a great actor, like an amazing photographer, an amazing kind of, amateur film historian. He could just could talk movies in circles around anyone. But yeah, just the loveliest guy and definitely brought out the best in everyone on set.
It's very beautiful. Thank you guys for sharing that. That's, I think, a very beautiful way to remember someone who not just asked what they brought to, obviously, us as audience members, but what they brought to you guys individually. Thank you. One thing that I was very curious about, because I'm always interested in films that deal with female friendship and how, particularly nasty sometimes they can get, especially in adolescence. But I'm curious, Cory, what made you decide for this movie to center on two young women, especially one that's like so complex and psychologically brutal? And I think that sort of female friendship is very specific, you know, and I was just wondering, why did you decide these characters, and talk a little bit about just developing the story and getting the right tone of that sort of female friendship?
Yeah, I think the roles developed pretty organically. It was in the very first draft of the play was a very, very different play, and was almost kind of centered on what became Francie Swift's character, the mother. And there was this character, Lily, who was this interesting young woman who sort of didn't have enough to do in that version of the script. And I scrapped most of that script, but came back and kind of gave myself the challenge of making her the center of the story, which ended up being the most interesting choice, I think. And there was initially a male friend. Luckily, neither of you have ever seen this version of the script, and it will never see the light of day. But there was a male friend, and at some point she became a female friend and became Amanda. And there had always been this aspect of horse euthanasia, and it just suddenly all kind of clicked into place when the horse euthanizer was this old friend who was like a very accomplished equestrian who'd been once very close and had fallen out of touch and had just gone off in her own direction in life and become this sort of like fully developed, strange moral being. And when I'd found those two voices on this couch, I'd sort of found the heart of the play, and the rest came from there. But so I don't know exactly what choices led to, feminizing the characters, but I've certainly written my share of young male characters like myself, and sort of underdeveloped female characters, and it was a little bit of a personal challenge to shake myself out of those habits.
Well, that's a damn good personal challenge to take up. So one thing I mentioned a little bit earlier was that, Thoroughbreds feels from, I think, the very beginning to be a very violent film, even just in the dialogue. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is just that most of the important violence does happen off screen, including, obviously, the murder that the whole story sort of hinges upon. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about why you decided to do those scenes, have them be off screen.
I think there were a lot of reasons. I think that decision had its roots in the story being a play, and I think it's especially hard to control the tone of violence on stage. It so easily goes sort of farcy, and not the language, in the direction of farce. Just suddenly everyone's speaking Farsi. It's really weird. But no, there's particularly, I think people become very aware of the blood spurting machine, and I still think that can be true even of very well done on-screen violence. It's so easy to have yourself taken out of it and sort of go ooh, how'd they pull that off? And some movies do that beautifully, but I think with this movie, it was at its core for me, it was about these kind of moral decisions and these characters reckoning with these forms of violence in their life, and it just felt right to stay in each of these sort of moments of violence or moments of discussion of violence, to stay on the character that was sort of grappling with what that violence meant, or who was about to have their life changed by the violence, rather than on the violence itself. That felt like that was the site of whatever the movie was interested in for each of those moments.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes I think, just as a viewer, and maybe this is why I love so many classic noirs, is when we get to imagine how the violence plays out. I think that sometimes says a lot more about us as an audience, and just lets us engage with the film in a very different level. So I actually think that was a really smart choice. But I was curious for you two, when it comes to I think pretty much your final scene together, you're unconscious, and because you've been drugged, and you obviously go off screen and kill your stepfather. I get it. I understand. And I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about approaching that scene, because it's actually strangely tender. I think the last conversation they have, and then how you kind of go into her arms and you're weirdly cradled by her. And I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about shooting that and your approach to it, because I thought it was such an interesting balance of tone.
Well, for me, I'm not speaking for you, Cory, but when an actor has to display such immense emotion, I think I personally try and give them as much space as possible, and I think the whole set kind of behaved that way as well, and everything was kind of said in a whisper and a hushed tone to give Anya as much time and as much quiet time as she needed, because I was just asleep, so I didn't have to do anything.
Don't knock it. She stayed very still for a very long time. It's actually very hard to do. And yeah, obviously from an Anya point of view, I felt awful because I was smearing her in all of this sticky, disgusting stuff. But it was very early in the morning, and everyone was very respectful. And Cory and I had intense conversations about what's going on upstairs that we won't share with you because it's important that everyone brings their own interpretation to the movie. But I will say that my favorite movies are where the violence and the horror isn't shown to you because you get to bring yourself into it and your own imagination, and it's always scarier when you don't see it because you're basically conjuring up your own worst nightmares. So it felt really good, and hopefully we pulled it off. So, yeah.
I definitely think you guys pulled it off. I really loved the last kind of scene you guys share, and I was like kind of surprised by the tenderness of it, especially because I think that's when they're also like laying all the cards on the table and really showing who they are, and it gives each character like a very different dimension than you're expecting. Because it's like, girl, you really drugged your friend. You really okay, girl? All right.
I love that line. I roofied you. It's just like completely point blank.
And so this is a question I have a little bit as a film nerd, because there's two pivotal scenes in the film where there's classic films showing, and one of them, if I'm not mistaken, is DOA, which is a really great noir from 1949. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about why did you choose those two different classic films to be playing in the background?
Yeah, the first one is DOA, and the second is The Little Princess, the Shirley Temple movie. And both of them, the first decision was to go with sort of classic films rather than what, teenagers more realistically might be watching on a couch, which if you go for like a very of the moment show, you can very easily date the movie, I think. And we wanted the movie to feel a little bit sort of out of time and to be riffing on this sort of older genre. And the particular movies, some of it was just the first one, the dialogue was already scripted, and we needed a very specific moment of a woman, an actress, crying, and sort of crying, ideally like a little bit less convincingly for a moment, and then more convincingly, just to sort of provide the impetus for these lines about fake crying. And the second, we had much more, The Little Princess, we had much more flexibility with what that was going to be. And I think something just felt, we tried a million things, but something just felt like it was sort of the right level of irony for that moment. We wanted a little bit of levity from the television. And there are all sorts of maybe very obvious thematic resonances between that movie, and they're talking about horses and all of that. But it just sort of worked. It filled that silence with the right kind of light touch without, screaming some kind of commentary over that scene.
Yeah, no, that's tricky to have something playing in the background. So I definitely think those were smart choices, and not just because I think DOA is amazing. And if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's in public domain, y'all. So
it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it is on YouTube. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to get a hold of. So I have a question for you two. I just love talking to actors, so I'm going to just continue with the process questions. And I think we have a few more minutes left. So one thing I was curious about, did you find it more difficult, especially you, Anya, but did you find it more difficult to do the very intense dialogue-heavy scenes or the more silent scenes that kind of required a different level of focus?
Oh, interesting. It's weird. I never really approach scenes as difficult. It almost just feels like, oh, what do I get to play at today? Because I really love my job, which is really lame, but like, yay. I will say that what is wonderful about doing the dialogue scenes with Olivia is that whilst we didn't improvise, we had, because it's kind of shot in the sort of play sense where we do experience things in real time and we are completely in control of the pacing of our dialogue, you know, because the scenes are so long, you never knew where you were going to end up. And so every take we would approach it with a different energy. And, you know, Olivia would suddenly take a pause in something and it would literally feel like the whole room vacuumed, and it felt electrifying. So it was, I think I personally enjoyed the dialogue scenes more just because we are usurping and attacking each other through spiky, deliciously dripping with nastiness dialogue. So that was just fun to say.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
If that says anything about me as a person, but
No,
you know.
I agree. Like, we got to do a lot of acting together. Usually, you know, I mean, I did 5 seasons of Bates Motel, and a lot of it was like, "Where's Norman?" So it was really nice to sink your teeth into this, like, just incredible dialogue, and also to reciprocate your compliments to act with Anya as well, because I think she could. She threw me a bunch of curveballs, and it was my job to respond accordingly. So it was really fun.
Nice. So I think we only have time for probably one more question, if my clock is right. If it's not, oops, sorry, y'all. No. But one thing I definitely wanted to ask about was working with a cinematographer, because I think this film is just so, it's beautiful, but there's also something weirdly claustrophobic about it and almost antiseptic. It's like, almost like, should people even be living in this house? Is this a museum? It's like, man, white people crazy? No. And I was wondering if you could talk about working with Lyle Vincent, who he obviously worked on A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and that also has a different sort of richness to it. And just maybe talk a little bit about the look of the film and, you know, how that also maybe affected how you approached your performances as well.
I remember Cory being like, "Does lighting always take this long?" And I was like, yeah, it does. But I mean, it freaking pays off because it looks so beautiful.
Yeah. No, yeah, Lyle's like super, super meticulous. And I was always drawn to that. I thought this particular story would definitely benefit from like a very kind of like calculated visual style, and a very clean, I like that term, antiseptic. I'm gonna use that, but that sort of a style. Cool. And so a lot of it was Lyle, and a lot of it came down to the home that we found too, which was definitely the hardest piece of casting in the movie, was finding that house. And it was like a multi-month search in Massachusetts. We ended up finding one south of Boston. But and it is so much. I mean, so much of the movie are sort of medium close-ups on these two, and then the home stretching out behind them, and we got a lot of mileage out of this really beautiful, strange house, and Lyle was fantastic to work with. I think we all just thought just one of the loveliest, most sort of radiant human beings on set, which is important in that role, I think, and yeah, it was a real pleasure.
And if you want to get like super intense and cerebral about it, I mean, you look at that house and it is so beautiful and it is so peculiar and strange and so evidently dripping in wealth. But you're right, it doesn't look like anybody lives there. Like even in the scenes when, I think the couch, bizarrely enough, is the one item of furniture in the house that actually feels like we could sit on it. Yeah, pretty much. You go into the kitchen, you're like, can I touch this? Can I? And
There's nothing on the counters.
Yeah, absolutely nothing. So it's like a really beautiful, bizarre, gilded cage, which I think is a nice metaphor for these people and the privileged society that both entraps and informs them.
No, that's definitely a good way to put it. It is beautiful but strange and not inviting at all, despite its beauty. It's like, I would never want to live there. Ever. Like, that's on some, nah, I'm good. But I wanted to, I think we're pretty much out of time at this point. Yeah, we are. Look at me going over. Sorry, y'all. But I wanted to thank you guys for coming out and talking about your fascinating performances and this really beautifully shot, fascinating, and wonderfully fucked up movie. And thank you guys for being here. I hope you guys had a great time.
Thank you all.
And thank
Thanks
you.
for
You're
talking.
lovely.